Trash. That's all you are, Sarah. Just a piece of trash my husband forgot to take out before he died. The slap didn't just hurt. It rang through the hollow silence of the cathedral, echoing off the stained glass. My cheek burned, but the coldness in my stepmother Linda's eyes was sharper. She stood there in her designer black veil, smelling of expensive lilies and gin, while I stood in a coat I'd found in a thrift bin 3 winters ago. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted me erased. Welcome to the channel. This is a story of betrayal, the brutal reality of the streets, and a legacy hidden in plain sight. If you're ready for a story that cuts deep, hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. Let's get back to the moment everything fell apart. But the funeral hadn't even ended when the security guards grabbed my arms. The security guards grabbed my arms. Not rough, not gentle, just efficient, professional. The kind of grip that said they'd done this before, evicting people who didn't belong. I didn't fight. Fighting would have given Linda exactly what she wanted. A scene. Something she could point to later and say, "See, always unstable, just like her mother." They walked me down the center aisle of St. Benedict's Cathedral, past rows of people who'd known my father, business associates, golf buddies, women who'd slept with him before Linda locked that down. Not one of them looked at me. Their eyes stayed fixed on the mahogany casket at the altar, or on their phones, or on the floor. Anywhere but at the daughter being removed from her own father's funeral. The air outside hit different. February in Boston. Wet, raw, the kind of cold that settles into your bones and stays there. My coat, the one from the thrift bin, had a broken zipper. I held it closed with one hand as I walked down the cathedral steps. Behind me, the heavy doors shut with a sound like a vault closing. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time. People walked past, heading to work, to lunch, to lives that made sense. I had $43 in my pocket. No phone. I'd sold it 2 months ago for $70 that went toward a motel room for 3 nights. No keys, because I had no door to unlock. The apartment I'd been crashing in, a favor from a girl I used to know in college, had ended last week when her boyfriend moved in. My father was dead. My stepmother had just hit me in front of a cathedral full of witnesses, and then I was homeless. The rain started around noon. I walked to the public library on Boylston. It was warm there and dry, and they didn't kick you out unless you caused trouble or smelled too bad. I wasn't at the smelling bad stage yet. That would come later. For now, I just looked poor. Dirty jeans, worn boots, with the sole starting to separate on the left one, that broken coat. I found a table in the back, near the radiator. The heat felt good. I closed my eyes and tried to think through the math. $43. A meal at McDonald's was maybe $8 if I got the value menu. That was 5 meals if I stretched it. 5 meals over how many days? If I ate once a day, that was 5 days. But the human body needs more than 1 meal a day, doesn't it? I'd been running on less for weeks now, so maybe I was used to it. Yeah, maybe 5 days was realistic. After 5 days, then what? The library closed at 8. I stayed until 7:45, then walked out into the rain again. It was coming down harder now, cold and mean. The kind of rain that doesn't just get you wet, it gets inside you, makes everything damp and heavy. There was a shelter on Mass Avenue, the one run by the Catholic charity. I'd been there twice before. They had rules: no drugs, no alcohol, no fighting, and you had to be in line by 6:30 for a bed. It was past 8 now. I'd missed it. I walked to the train station at Park Street and sat on a bench until a cop told me to move. Then I walked to another bench at Downtown Crossing and sat there until a different cop told me to move. This went on for hours. Walk, sit, get told to move, walk again. Around 2 in the morning, and I found a spot under an overpass near the Charles River. The concrete was dry there, protected from the rain. Someone had left a flattened cardboard box, and I laid it out, sat down on it, pulled my knees to my chest. The traffic overhead was sparse at this hour. Just the occasional rumble of a truck, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. I didn't sleep. You don't sleep when you're this cold. You just wait for the sun to come up. 3 days later, I spent $6 on a breakfast sandwich at Dunkin' Donuts. It was gone in 4 bites, and the hollow growl in my stomach didn't even quiet. It just shifted, became a dull ache instead of a sharp one. I sat in that Dunkin' for 2 hours, nursing a small coffee I'd refilled 3 times from the self-serve station when the staff wasn't looking. An old man across from me was doing the same thing. But we didn't talk. There was an understanding between people like us. You don't draw attention, you don't make noise, you don't give them a reason to kick you out. By day 5, I was down to $11. I started looking for day labor. There were spots in Southie where contractors would pick up workers in the morning. Cash jobs, no questions asked. I stood with the men at 5:30 a.m., my hands shoved in my pockets, trying to look capable, strong, hireable. No one picked me. I was a woman, and I was small, and I didn't have gloves or boots that looked like they could handle a construction site. After 2 hours, I walked back toward downtown, my feet already blistering from standing. The hunger was different now. It wasn't just my stomach anymore, it was my head, a light, dizzy feeling that made it hard to think straight. And my hands shook when I held them out. I told myself it was the cold, but I knew better. I went to a soup kitchen on Tremont. The line stretched around the block. Men, women, a couple of kids holding their mothers' hands. I stood in it for 90 minutes. When I finally got inside, they handed me a tray with a ladle of soup, 2 slices of white bread, and an apple that had a bruise the size of a quarter. I ate it standing up, leaning against the wall. The soup was thin, mostly broth, but it was hot. The bread soaked it up. The apple I saved in my pocket for later. A woman next to me was eating with her hands cupped around the bowl, like someone might take it from her. She had sores on her face, scabs that looked infected. Her eyes were glassy. I looked away. That night, I went back to the overpass. Someone else had taken the cardboard spot. I didn't fight for it. I just kept walking until I found a doorway to a closed pharmacy. I curled up there, my back against the metal grate, and watched the streetlights flicker. Sleep came in pieces. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Every time a car passed, I woke up. Every time footsteps got close, my body went rigid, ready to run. When the sun came up, I was still there. The shame was the worst part. Not the cold, not the hunger, the shame. When you hold out your hand for a half-eaten sandwich someone's throwing away, when you ask if there's any extra, when you stand there and wait for them to decide if you're worth the leftovers, that's when you understand what it means to be invisible, to be less than. I stood outside a Panera one afternoon, watching through the window as a businessman ate half a bagel, then pushed his tray away. The rest sat there, cream cheese still on it, untouched. He got up, walked out. I waited 30 seconds, then went in, walked straight to his table, took the bagel, and left before anyone could say anything. I ate it on the street, standing against a brick wall. It was cold. The cream cheese had hardened. I ate every bite. A woman walking by saw me. She looked at me the way you look at a stain on the sidewalk, with mild disgust, then kept walking. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and kept moving. By the end of the first week, I'd lost 6 pounds. I could feel it in my face, in the way my jeans hung loose on my hips. My body was eating itself. I drank water from public fountains to fill the space in my stomach, but it didn't help. Water doesn't have calories. I started seeing food everywhere, in trash cans, on the ground, out in the hands of people who didn't finish their meals. My brain catalogued it all, calculated what was safe to eat, what wasn't, what I could get away with taking. There was a CVS on Boylston, where I sometimes went to get warm. I stood in the snack aisle once, staring at the candy bars, doing the math. If I stole one, what were the chances I'd get caught? If I got caught, what would happen? A fine I couldn't pay? Jail? I didn't steal it. I just stood there staring, until a worker asked if I needed help finding something. No, I said. I'm good. I left. Linda was everywhere. I saw her face in the Boston Globe, in a photo from a charity gala. She wore a gold dress that probably cost more than I used to make in 6 months, at the bookstore where I'd worked before everything fell apart. The headline said, "Linda Miller champions arts education at annual gala." She was smiling, holding a champagne flute, standing next to a city councilman. I was sitting in the library again when I saw it, reading the paper someone had left on the table. I stared at her face for a long time. The smile was the same one she'd given me at the funeral, right before she called me trash. My father had been dead 2 weeks. I started following the trail, piecing together what I could from public records, from news articles, from the scraps of information I'd overheard over the years. My father, Arthur Miller, had been a developer. Not the flashy kind. He didn't build skyscrapers or hotels. He bought land. Lots of it. Quietly. Parcels in neighborhoods that didn't look like much but would in 10 or 20 years, when the city expanded. Linda had been his third wife. They'd been married for 6 years when he died. Heart attack in his office, slumped over his desk with a pen still in his hand. He was 61. I'd barely spoken to him in the last decade. After my mother died, when I was 12, he'd drifted, started working more, traveling more. By the time I was in high school, we were strangers living in the same house. When I turned 18, I moved out. He didn't stop me. I didn't know he'd remarried until I saw the announcement in the paper. Linda Graves, formerly a real estate agent in Newton, now Linda Miller. The wedding photo showed them on a beach somewhere tropical. She wore white. He wore linen. They both looked happy. I didn't go to the wedding. He didn't invite me. Now, she was the widow. And according to the probate filings I managed to access on the library computer, she was set to inherit everything. The house in Beacon Hill, the investments, the properties. I kept digging. There were names I recognized, streets, neighborhoods, parcels my father had owned for years. Some of them were just empty lots. Some had buildings on them, old warehouses or triple-deckers that hadn't been renovated yet. I pulled up the property records, cross-referenced them with the probate documents. Something didn't match. There were properties listed in the probate filing, sure, but there were others, dozens of them, that weren't. They were still in my father's name, buried in LLC filings, hidden under corporate structures that didn't connect to his estate at all. I wrote down the addresses on a scrap of paper I'd pulled from the recycling bin. My handwriting was shaky. I hadn't eaten in 16 hours, but I got them all down. Then I went to see them. The first address was in Dorchester, a street I'd never heard of. I took the train, then walked 6 blocks in the rain. My boots were soaked through by the time I got there. It was a lot. Just dirt and gravel, fenced in with chain link. A sign on the fence said, "Property of Eastbridge Development, LLC." No phone number, no contact info. I stood there for a while, staring at it. The lot didn't look like much. There was trash in the corners, plastic bags, a broken chair, beer bottles, but it was big. Half a city block, maybe more. I checked my notes. Eastbridge Development, LLC. I'd seen that name in the property records. My father had set it up in 1997, 3 years before I was born. I walked the perimeter of the fence. At the back, there was a gap where the chain link had been cut, then loosely wired back together. I pulled the wire apart and slipped through. The ground was uneven, pocked with puddles. I walked across it slowly, my eyes scanning for anything useful. In the far corner, there was a small concrete structure, half buried, like the foundation of something that had been torn down years ago. I knelt next to it. The concrete was old, cracked, covered in moss. But there was something else, a metal plate, rusted but intact, with an engraving. Patent number 5,847,392. Method for soil stabilization in urban development zones. I didn't know what that meant, but I took a photo of it with a disposable camera I'd bought for $3 at a CVS. Then I left. The second address was in Roxbury. Another lot, another fence, another patent plate, and this one for a water filtration system. The third was in Alston. Same thing. By the time I hit the 5th address, a warehouse in Somerville, I was starting to understand. My father hadn't just bought land. He'd invented things, processes, systems, and he'd buried them in these properties, filed the patents under the LLCs, kept them out of the public eye. I went back to the library and spent 6 hours on the computer, pulling up patent filings, cross-referencing them with the addresses I'd found. There were 23 patents in total. Some were for construction techniques, others were for environmental systems, drainage, soil treatment, air quality monitoring. Every single one of them was filed under an LLC my father controlled, and every single one of them was being used. I pulled up news articles on development projects across the city, luxury condos, mixed-use buildings, transit hubs. They were all using my father's patents, and they were all paying licensing fees. I found the payments buried in corporate records, millions of dollars flowing into the LLCs every year. And the LLCs, they weren't part of the estate. They weren't in the probate filing. They were separate entities, and according to the operating agreements I managed to dig up, they had a single designated heir. Me. I sat there at the computer, staring at the screen, my hands shaking. The librarian walked by. "We close in 10 minutes, she said. I nodded, didn't move. She walked away. I read the operating agreement again, then again, looking for a mistake, a loophole, something that would prove I was wrong. There was nothing. My father had left me an empire, and Linda had no idea. I didn't go to a lawyer, not yet. Lawyers cost money, and I had $7 left. More than that, lawyers ask questions. They want documentation, proof of identity, a permanent address. I had none of those things. Instead, I kept watching. Linda was renovating the house in Beacon Hill. I saw the permits filed with the city. New kitchen, new bathrooms, a pergola in the back garden. The contractor she'd hired was charging her $400,000. I stood across the street one afternoon and watched the workers carry in slabs of marble, stainless steel appliances still in their plastic wrap, a chandelier the size of a dining table. Linda's car, a black Mercedes SUV, was parked in the driveway. She came out once, talking on her phone, gesturing with one hand. She wore yoga pants and a cashmere sweater. Her hair was blown out. Perfect. She laughed at something the person on the other end said, then got in the car and drove away. I stood there until the cold made my fingers numb. Then I walked back to the shelter. I'd started staying there regularly now. I had a routine: line up at 6 o'clock, get a bed, eat the dinner they served, usually pasta or rice with some kind of meat in a sauce. The food wasn't good, but it was food. After dinner, I'd go to the common room and watch TV with the others, or I'd lie in my bunk and stare at the ceiling. The woman in the bunk above me was named Rita. She'd been on the streets for 3 years. She told me her story one night. Laid off from her job at a hotel, couldn't make rent, got evicted. She had a son in Florida, but they didn't talk anymore. I didn't tell her my story. I just listened. And the shelter had a rule. You could only stay for 30 consecutive nights. After that, you had to leave for at least a week before you could come back. My 30 nights were almost up. I needed a plan. I went back to the library and started pulling together everything I had. Copies of the patent filings, screenshots of the LLC operating agreements, a timeline of the licensing payments. I put it all in a folder I'd found in the trash, organized it as best I could. Then I started looking for lawyers who did free consultations. There was a firm in Cambridge that specialized in estate law. Their website said they offered a 1-hour consultation at no charge. I called from the library's phone and made an appointment for the following Tuesday. The receptionist asked for my name and number. I gave her my name, Sarah Miller, but said I didn't have a phone. She paused, then said, "Okay, we'll see you Tuesday at 2. I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Meanwhile, Linda was spending. I saw it in the invoices that were public record. A trip to New York, first-class tickets to a Broadway show, a shopping spree at Neiman Marcus, $12,000 on a single afternoon, dinners at restaurants where the wine list started at $300 a bottle. She was burning through my father's money like it would never run out, and maybe, in her mind, it wouldn't. The law office was in a brick building near Harvard Square. I got there 20 minutes early and sat on a bench outside, trying to calm my nerves. I'd washed my face in the shelter bathroom that morning, scrubbed under my nails, and brushed my hair with a comb I'd found. I was wearing the same clothes I'd been wearing for weeks, but I'd done my best. At 2, I went inside. The receptionist looked up from her desk, smiled politely. "Sarah Miller?" "Yes." "Mr. Brennan will see you in a moment. Please have a seat." I sat in one of the leather chairs in the waiting area. There were magazines on the table: Forbes, The Economist, Boston Magazine. I didn't touch them. After 10 minutes, a man came out. He was in his 50s, grey hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a suit that fit him well, but wasn't flashy. "Sarah, I'm Paul Brennan. Come on back." His office was small but organized, bookshelves lined with legal texts, a desk with a computer, a window that looked out onto the street. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. I sat. "So," he said, unsettling into his own chair. You mentioned on the phone this was about an estate matter. Tell me what's going on." I opened my folder and started laying out the documents. I explained who my father was, when he died, what Linda had inherited. Then I showed him the LLCs, the patents, the licensing payments. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment. "How long have you been homeless?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "What?" "Your coat has a broken zipper. Your boots are falling apart. You've lost weight. I can see it in your face. And you're here on a Tuesday afternoon, when most people are at work. So I'm asking, how long have you been homeless?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, 2 months. He nodded. "Okay, here's what I'm going to tell you. What you have here, this is real. These LLCs, these patents, they're worth a lot of money. Conservatively, I'd estimate the licensing fees alone generate somewhere between $50 and $100 million a year. And if your father set them up the way you're describing, with you as the designated heir, then yes, they're yours." My chest tightened. "So I can—" "Hold on," he said. "Here's the problem. You don't just get to walk into a bank and say, 'I own this.' You need to prove it. That means documentation, birth certificate, proof of identity, copies of the LLC operating agreements with original signatures, affidavits from people who can verify your father's intent. And then you need to file a claim, which means court, which means time. Months, maybe a year." "I don't have months," I said. I have $7. "I understand," he said, "and I want to help you, but this isn't a quick fix. Estate law is slow, especially when there's money involved. Your stepmother will fight this. She'll hire lawyers, drag it out, challenge every document you bring. And in the meantime, you still need to eat." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking again. "Here's what I can do," Brennan said. "I'll take your case, pro bono for now. We'll get the documentation together, file the claim, start the process. But you need to take care of yourself. Get into a stable living situation. Get some food in you. Get healthy. Because if this goes to court and you show up looking like you're barely surviving, the other side will use that against you. They'll say you're desperate, unreliable, and not fit to manage an estate of this size." "I am desperate," I said. "I know," he said, "but we don't let them see that." He opened a drawer, pulled out a checkbook, wrote something, tore it off, and slid it across the desk. $500. "This is an advance against future fees," he said. "Use it to get yourself stable. Get a room somewhere. Get some food. Buy clothes that fit. Then come back and we'll start the real work." I stared at the check. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Because you're sitting here with $7 and a folder full of documents that prove you're owed $500 million, and you haven't asked me for anything except help. That tells me you're serious, and I don't get a lot of serious people in here." I took the check. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Oh, we've got a long road ahead." Brennan gave me $500 in cash before I left his office. He said it was an advance against future fees, but I knew what it really was. Charity. I took it anyway. I used $200 to buy new clothes. Nothing fancy, just jeans that fit, a clean shirt, a coat with a working zipper. I spent another $50 on a cheap phone, a prepaid model from Target. The rest I saved. I found a room in a boarding house in Jamaica Plain. It was $90 a week, shared bathroom down the hall, no kitchen. The walls were thin, and the heat barely worked, but it was mine. I had a door I could lock. Brennan worked fast. Within 2 weeks, he'd filed a petition with the probate court, challenging the distribution of my father's estate and asserting my claim to the LLCs. He'd also sent a notice to Linda's lawyer, a man named Gerald Kopp, who worked for a white shoe firm downtown. Kopp responded with a motion to dismiss. He argued that the LLCs were separate from the estate, that there was no proof I was the designated heir, and that the petition was frivolous. Brennan filed a counter-motion, attaching copies of the LLC operating agreements, the patent filings, and a letter my father had written in 2003, addressed to his accountant, explicitly stating that the LLCs were to be held in trust for his daughter, Sarah. The judge scheduled a hearing for March. In the meantime, I worked. I got a job washing dishes at a diner in Somerville. $8 an hour, cash under the table. I worked 6 days a week, 10-hour shifts, coming home with my hands raw from the hot water and bleach. The work was mindless, mechanical. Scrape the plates, rinse, unload the machine, unload, stack, repeat. The kitchen was hot. The floors were slick with grease, and the cook, a guy named Dennis, who'd been there 20 years, barely spoke to me except to tell me to move faster. But I didn't care. I had a paycheck, I had a room, I had a phone, I had a future, even if it was still blurry. At night, I read. Brennan had given me copies of all the legal filings, and I went through them line by line, teaching myself the language, the arguments, the process. I needed to understand this. I needed to know what was happening. Linda, meanwhile, was spending. I saw her at a restaurant in the South End one night. I was walking home from the diner, cutting through the neighborhood, when I passed a place with floor-to-ceiling windows. She was at a table near the front, laughing with 3 other women, and all of them dressed like they'd just come from a gallery opening. I stopped and watched for a minute. The waiter brought them a bottle of wine, something that probably cost $200. Linda raised her glass, said something that made the others laugh, then took a sip. She looked happy, relaxed, like she didn't have a care in the world. I kept walking. 2 weeks before the hearing, Brennan called me. "We need to talk," he said. I took the train to Cambridge. When I got to his office, he had a stack of papers on his desk. "Cops pushing hard," he said. "He's filed 3 more motions trying to delay the hearing. He's also hired a private investigator to dig into your background." "What's he looking for?" "Anything he can use to discredit you. Arrests, debts, and anything that makes you look unstable or unfit." I leaned back in the chair. "He won't find anything." "Good," Brennan said. "But we need to be prepared. If this goes to court, Copp's going to paint you as opportunistic, a daughter who ignored her father for years, then came crawling back when she smelled money." "That's not what happened." "I know," he said, "but it's what he'll say. So we need to get ahead of it. I need you to write down every interaction you had with your father in the last 10 years. Dates, locations, what you talked about, everything." I spent the next 3 days writing. It wasn't much, a handful of conversations, most of them awkward, most of them short. The coffee shop in Cambridge, a lunch in 2019, where he asked about my job, and I lied and said it was going well, and a phone call on my birthday in 2021 that lasted 4 minutes. That was it. That was our relationship. I gave the list to Brennan. He read it, nodded. "This is fine," he said. "It's honest. That's what matters." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a judge's bench that looked like it had been there since the 60s. I sat next to Brennan at the petitioner's table. Across from us, Linda sat with Cop, her back straight, her expression calm. She was wearing a black suit, pearls, heels that clicked when she walked. She looked like someone who belonged there. I was in my new jeans and a blazer Brennan had lent me. It was too big in the shoulders. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia O'Hare, came in and we all stood. She sat, we sat. She looked at the papers in front of her, then at us. This is a petition to modify the distribution of the estate of Arthur Miller, deceased, she said. Ms. Miller, you're represented by Mr. Brennan. Mrs. Linda Miller, you're represented by Mr. Cop. Let's hear opening statements. Mr. Brennan, you first. Brennan stood. He was calm, methodical. He laid out the facts. Arthur Miller had established multiple LLCs during his lifetime. Those LLCs owned valuable patents and real property. The LLCs were not included in the probate filing because they were separate legal entities. However, the operating agreements for those LLCs explicitly named Sarah Miller, me, as the designated heir and beneficiary. He submitted the documents. The judge flipped through them. Cop stood next. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with slicked back hair and a voice that sounded like he was always on the verge of sighing. He argued that the LLCs were a red herring, that even if they existed, there was no proof they were worth anything, and no proof that my father had actually intended for me to inherit them. He called the letter to the accountant hearsay and questioned whether it was even authentic. The judge looked at me. Miss Miller, when was the last time you spoke to your father? I stood. My legs felt shaky. 5 years ago, at a coffee shop in Cambridge, he asked how I was doing. I said fine. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Then he left. Did he mention these LLCs, these patents? No. Did he ever discuss his estate with you, his plans for after his death? No. She nodded. Sit down. I sat. The hearing went on for 2 hours, and Brennan called a witness, my father's accountant, a man named Leonard Choi, who'd worked with him for 30 years. Choi testified that my father had been very clear about the LLCs, that he'd set them up specifically to keep them separate from his estate, and that he'd always referred to them as Sarah's inheritance. Cop cross-examined him, tried to poke holes in his memory, asked if he had any documentation beyond the 2003 letter. Choi said no, but he was firm. Arthur was explicit about this. He wanted Sarah to have the LLCs. He said it multiple times over the years. And yet he never told her, Cop said. That's correct. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Choi paused. Arthur was a private man. He kept a lot to himself, but his intent was clear to me. Linda didn't testify. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, watching. And her face gave nothing away, no anger, no fear, nothing. Just calm. At one point, she looked at me. Our eyes met. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked, then turned back to the judge. At the end, Judge O'Hare said she'd issue a ruling within 30 days. We left. Outside the courthouse, Brennan put a hand on my shoulder. You did fine, he said. I didn't do anything, I said. Exactly, he said. You showed up. You were honest. That's all we needed. 30 days is a long time when you're living in a room with no heat and working 10 hours a day, washing dishes. I kept my head down, went to work, came home, read the legal documents, slept. The woman in the room next to mine played music at night. Gospel, loud enough that I could hear every word through the wall. I didn't complain. It was better than silence. Brennan called me once a week with updates. Mostly there were no updates. The judge was reviewing the evidence. These things took time. I saw Linda twice during those 30 days. Once at a Whole Foods in Brookline, loading groceries into her Mercedes, organic vegetables, bottles of wine, a bouquet of fresh flowers. Once at a crosswalk downtown, talking on her phone, laughing at something. She didn't see me either time. I thought about approaching her, walking up, saying something. But what would I say? What was there to say? So I just watched, then kept walking. The shelter called me on day 23. Rita, the woman who'd been in the bunk above me, had been found unconscious in an alley off Mass Avenue. Drug overdose. She was alive, but barely. They'd taken her to Mass General. I went to see her. She was in a bed in the ICU, and tubes in her arms, a machine breathing for her. Her son had flown in from Florida. He sat next to her, holding her hand, not saying anything. I stood in the doorway for a minute, then left. On day 27, Brennan called. "We have a ruling," he said. "And you need to come to the office." I took the train to Cambridge. My hands were sweating the whole way. When I got to Brennan's office, he was waiting in the lobby. "Come on," he said. He led me to a conference room. There was a folder on the table. He sat down, gestured for me to do the same. "Judge O'Hare ruled in your favor," he said. "The LLCs are yours." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "She found that the operating agreements were clear and unambiguous," he continued. "She also found that Mr. Choi's testimony was credible and that the 2003 letter, while not dispositive on its own, corroborated the intent expressed in the operating agreements. She's ordering the LLCs to be transferred to your name, effective immediately." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you're the owner," he said. "The patents, the licensing fees, the properties, all of it. It's yours." I looked at the folder. "How much?" He opened it, pulled out a spreadsheet. We had a forensic accountant go through the financials. The LLCs have been generating an average of $72 million per year in licensing fees for the past decade. Add in the value of the real property and the patents themselves, and we're looking at a total net worth of approximately $490 billion. The number didn't make sense. I stared at it on the page. 490 billion. That's not real," I said. "It's real," Brennan said. I sat back in the chair. My vision blurred. I blinked, realized I was crying. Brennan pushed a box of tissues across the table. I took one, wiped my eyes. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we transfer the assets," he said. "I'll work with the accountant and the bank to get everything set up. You'll need to sign some documents, set up accounts, hire a financial manager. It's going to take a few weeks to get everything in order. But Sarah, you're going to be fine." I nodded. Couldn't speak. He stood, walked around the table, put a hand on my shoulder. "You did this," he said. "You survived, you fought, and you won." Linda contested the ruling. Of course she did. Kopp filed an appeal, arguing that the judge had erred in accepting Choi's testimony, that the operating agreements were ambiguous, that the whole thing was a fraud. The appeal went nowhere. The appellate court upheld Judge O'Hare's decision. Kopp filed a motion for reconsideration. That went nowhere too. 3 months after the hearing, the assets were officially transferred to my name. I had a bank account with a balance I couldn't even conceptualize. I had properties across the city. I had patents that companies were paying millions to license. I also had a problem. Linda. She'd burned through most of my father's estate. The house in Beacon Hill had a mortgage she couldn't pay. The renovations had cost more than budgeted. The contractor had filed a lien when she missed 2 payments. She'd taken out loans against the properties my father had left her, spent the money on clothes, cars, and trips to Napa and Paris and Turks and Caicos. Now, the creditors were calling. The bank was threatening foreclosure. I got a call from Cop's office. He wanted to negotiate. I told Brennan to set up a meeting. We met at a restaurant in Back Bay, neutral ground. Linda showed up with Cop. I showed up with Brennan and the forensic accountant, a woman named Diane, who didn't smile. Linda looked different, thinner, tired. Her hair was still perfect, but the rest of her looked like it was fraying at the edges. Her hands shook slightly when she picked up her water glass. We sat. Cop started talking. Something about how his client was willing to settle, to avoid further litigation, to come to an amicable agreement. I cut him off. "How much do you owe?" I asked Linda directly. She looked at Cop. He started to answer, but I said, I'm asking her." Linda's jaw tightened. $3.2 million, she said. "And the house?" "It's worth $5 million. The mortgage is 2.8. I did the math. "So if you sold it, you'd walk away with 2.2, which isn't enough to cover the 3.2 you owe." She didn't answer. I leaned back in my chair. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "I'm going to pay off your debts, all of them. I'm also going to buy the house from you for $5 million, which will give you the 2.2 you'd get from selling it anyway, plus the extra million you need." Cop started to speak. I held up a hand. "In exchange," I continued, "you're going to sign a document stating that you relinquish any and all claims to my father's estate, to the LLCs, to me, to anything connected to the Miller name. You're going to disappear. I don't want to see you at charity galas. I don't want to see your name in the paper. You're going to take the money, leave Boston, and that's the end of it." Linda stared at me. "You can't." "I can," I said. "And I am. You slapped me at my father's funeral. You called me trash. You had me thrown out while he was still in the casket. You stood there in your designer dress and watched me walk away with nothing. So no, Linda, I don't owe you kindness. I don't owe you fairness. What I'm offering you is a way out. Take it or don't. But if you don't, I'll let the creditors have you, and you'll end up with nothing." The table was silent. Linda's hands were shaking harder now. She looked at Cop. He looked back at her, then at me, then at the documents Diane had placed on the table. "This is generous," Cop said carefully. "It's not generous," I said. "It's practical. I want this done. I want her gone." Linda's face had gone pale. "I need time to think." "No," I said. "You don't. You sign now, or the offer expires when I walk out that door." Brennan slid a pen across the table. Linda looked at it, at me, at Cop. Then she picked up the pen and signed. I bought the house in Beacon Hill and sold it 6 months later for $7 million. I didn't need it, didn't want it. It was full of ghosts, my father's, my childhood's, memories I'd spent years trying to forget. I bought a condo in the North End instead, something smaller, quieter. A place where I could see the harbor from the window, where I could watch the boats come in at dawn. I set up a foundation, Miller Legacy Fund, focused on housing and food security. We partnered with shelters, soup kitchens, and job training programs. I didn't run it. I hired people who knew what they were doing, people who'd been there, who understood what it meant to have nothing. But I funded it, fully. Rita, the woman from the shelter, became one of our first success stories. We got her into a job training program, helped her find an apartment, reconnected her with her son. She sent me a card last Christmas. It just said, "Thank you." I keep it on my desk. I still work. Not washing dishes. I have people who manage the LLCs now, accountants and lawyers and analysts who handle the day-to-day. But I go to the office. I read the reports. I make the decisions. It's my father's legacy, and I'm not going to let it rot. I think about him sometimes, about the fact that he built all this and never told me, about the letter he wrote to his accountant in 2003, the one where he said the LLCs were for me. I was 11 years old that year. My mother had been dead for a year. He was already pulling away. I don't know why he didn't just tell me. Maybe he thought he had time. Maybe he thought I'd figure it out. Maybe he was ashamed of how far apart we'd grown and didn't know how to bridge it. I'll never know. What I do know is this. I was homeless. I was cold. I was hungry. I held out my hand for half-eaten sandwiches and slept under overpasses and got told to move by cops who didn't see me as a person. And now I own half of Boston. Linda's gone. Last I heard, she was in Arizona, living in a gated community, spending what's left of the money I gave her. I heard through Brennan that she'd gotten remarried, some retired executive she met at a country club. I don't think about her much. She's not worth the space in my head. But I think about the overpass, the cold concrete, the sound of traffic overhead, the way the rain sounded on the pavement. I think about the shelter, the bunk bed, the woman above me who lost everything and almost never got it back. I think about the hollow growl of hunger, the shame of holding out your hand, the way people look through you when you're poor, like you're not even there. I think about all of it, and I make sure no one else has to. 5 years later, I'm standing in Dorchester in front of that first lot I visited. The chain-link fence is gone. In its place is a building. Affordable housing, 40 units, built using my father's soil stabilization patent. The rents are below market. The tenants are families who were on waiting lists for years. There's a plaque on the wall near the entrance. It says, Miller Legacy Housing, built on the foundation of second chances. I didn't write that. The foundation's director did, but I didn't argue with it. I stand there for a while, watching people come and go. A kid on a bike, a woman carrying groceries, an old man sitting on the front steps, reading a newspaper. They don't know who I am. They don't know what this building cost, or where the money came from, or that the woman standing on the sidewalk used to sleep under an overpass 6 blocks from here. And that's fine. I'm not doing this for recognition. I'm doing this because I know what it feels like to have nothing, to be nothing, in the eyes of people who matter. I'm doing this because no one should have to feel that way. A woman walks past me, pushing a stroller. She's young, maybe 25, wearing scrubs like she just got off a shift. She looks tired, but calm, safe. She lives here, I realize, in one of the units. She doesn't know that 6 years ago, I stood where she's standing, cold and hungry and invisible. She doesn't know that her home exists because I refused to stay invisible. I turn and walk back to my car. The city moves around me. Buses, taxis, people on their way to somewhere. I get in, start the engine, pull out into traffic. Somewhere in Arizona, Linda is probably sitting by a pool, drinking something with an umbrella in it, telling her new husband stories about her dead husband's money. Somewhere in a cemetery in West Roxbury, my father is in the ground, his name on a headstone I paid for. And somewhere in Boston, there are people sleeping in beds tonight who wouldn't have them without the empire my father built and left behind. I don't know if that evens the scales. I don't know if anything does, but it's a start. The traffic light ahead turns green. I press the gas and move forward. Always forward. If you made it to the end of Sarah's journey, Thank you for watching. This story is about more than money. It's about resilience, dignity, and the long road from nothing to everything. If this resonated with you, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell so you never miss a story, and drop a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below. We'll see you in the next one.